Yes, it works.
Okay, yeah, it's on my other monitor. Okay, well, welcome everybody. This is my presentation on the super project, just one part of the super project, and I'm going to mainly talk about this land development, what we've learned about that. And as Marianne pointed out, the European Union has a goal of what they call no net land take in 2050. We call that no urban development in 2050. And so one of the first things we want to do is, how is land being used and how is it being used differently? And that's the first part of my talk. When you look at how land changes in Europe, one of the biggest changes is between agricultural land and natural land. And it kind of moves back and forth. When you look at the national movements back and forth, there's quite a big variety. Right now, it's about equal amount of movement from agriculture to nature and nature to agriculture, but you see some marked differences of member states. In Spain, it's mainly moving from nature to agriculture, whereas in Poland and Hungary, it's the other way around. But in general, this is about zero net in Europe. What's not zero net is that urbanization. We're nowhere near that zero net, what they call land take, or what we call urbanization. Between 2000, which is the first period we could get data on, and 2018, we have more than 1 million hectares being converted to urban use. And if you want to visualize this, it's about 250 football fields every single day being converted from non-urban to urban use. So here on the right, you see its development over time. On the left, you see the to and from urban use. And you can ask, well, is this sustainable? Well, I guess the answer would be no if you see that zero is sustainable. It's obviously 250 football fields per day is more than zero, obviously. But if you dig deeper, more things come to light. For example, over time, this rate of urbanization seems to be slowing down. Of course, there's the economic crisis, and you can explain this in many different ways. But you can see, well, maybe we are getting closer to this goal of zero. Looking even closer, you can see who is urbanizing more and who is urbanizing less. And you see on the left side, the absolute hectares per day. And you see certain member states are doing much more than others. So there are definite hotspots in Europe to look at. Well, of course, some of this is just need. More people means more demand for housing. So you can also ask yourself, what is this in terms of population development? And you see also differences. Some areas are clearly urbanizing more than their population is growing, and some are less. And the last one is related to that graph that I showed before. Is it accelerating or decelerating in certain regions? And you see, for example, in the UK, urbanization is accelerating, where in the Netherlands, it's decelerating. The most urban development was between 2000 and 2006 in the Netherlands, and in the UK, it was in the last period. So this basically shows the territorial diversity in Europe just on this one indicator of urban development. So it's a very complex story, of course. And of course, it's not just the numbers, how many hectares are being developed. It's also about how is this occurring, the morphology of this. And of course, there's a big difference. Many of people here are spatial planners. Big difference between if you're urbanizing by making a compact neighborhood that's transit oriented, or you can ride there around with a bicycle, or a very car oriented diffuse structure. So how do you get a handle on this type of urbanization? And the super project also looked into this, and we created a kind of let's say, innovative methodology to do this. We looked at every single NUTS 3 region in Europe and eyeballed it and thought, what is the urban structure here? What do you see when you look at the urban structure? Can we classify this? And so we have one here on the left and one on the right. And we made here a distinction between what you first see in terms of the big globs. On the right, you see basically two big globs, and what you see outside of that. And we called that a main structure and a substructure. So we looked at this and classified this, and we said, for example, on the left, this seems to be monocentric main structure because you see mainly one big glob. But outside of that is rather polycentric diffuse. You see a lot of different small cores. And on the right, you see two main globs, and then outside is very, very diffuse, a lot of developments running along roadways. So after we've evaluated all this, we could look at Europe in terms of substructure and main structures. And you see a lot of polycentric structures in Europe. I think a lot of people who work in this field would recognize that. And also this substructure is more diffuse, as you could probably imagine. So this is our snapshot of Europe in 2018. We also looked at how it changed. So this on the right is how things are developing in the substructure only, let's say. And you see, if I go back and forth a couple times, there are some areas in Europe which already had a rather diffuse substructure, which people would call sprawl, and is developing in a more diffuse way. So what's happening in these areas? Well, if you were to zoom in, here's a particular one near Warsaw, and you see some very, very small developments occurring in rural areas. And we decide to zoom in on this. Well, if you go on Google Earth, then you see this kind of development. And is this rural use or not? Well, then you go on Google Street View and you see, no, this looks like it's just very, very low density urban development, but really quite far away from existing areas and not compact, very car oriented here. So some conclusions about developments that we see in Europe. We see we're not anywhere near that zero net land take. It is decelerating in general, but every area is a little bit different. One thing we can say is that when we look at urbanization, it's mainly one way. So when we see an area move from rural to urban, that's much, much more, 8 times more than the other way around. And Europe is extremely diverse. Some areas seem to be slowing down in the rate of urbanizations, others seem to be picking up. And when we looked at that morphological analysis, how is this actually working? We see that in general, countries tend to replicate their own morphological development. So if it was already diffuse, it tends to reproduce itself in a more diffuse way. But of course, we have to investigate this a lot more because there's a lot of variation here. So that is the past up to the present. We also looked at the future, and I'm going to go very quickly. We developed 3 future scenarios and said what would happen if from now Europe were to develop in a more compact way, a more diffuse way, or in a more polycentric way. And we created scenarios, and we put it through a land allocation model, and we created images of what Europe would look like. So I'm going to just show you very quickly in the diffuse scenario. Here we have the Brussels region on the left, middle of Italy in the middle, and the Randstad of the Netherlands on the right. And you see in dark red the new urbanization which occurs between now and 2050. And what happens in Belgium, it just really makes it extremely diffuse. There's very little green open space left. And in Italy, the development runs up into the mountains, And in the Randstad, very interestingly, lots of development along roadways out of town, which of course has been banned in the Netherlands since for 50 years. The polycentric scenario, totally different types of developments, especially in Italy. It's going on the towns and not so much in the mountains anymore. And the last one, the compact scenario. Still, Brussels region, very, very urbanized, but you still, in this scenario, you see some open spaces occurring. And in the Randstad, also not that urban development anymore, but some larger cities really grow into each other. So there's some other, once you have this, you can make all sorts of calculations on net urban growth, net population density, net sustainability on all kinds of indicators. That's all in our report. And what are our conclusions from the scenarios? One is it seems that this urban form does matter for sustainability. Of course, like we saw in the past, you inherit certain urban forms, so the development occurs according to what was already there. And what's the value of this? That you can start a conversation about which areas are developing in which scenarios and which areas are remaining open. And is that important for us? Are those areas that we really would like to preserve? Or if they're going to be urbanized, how should we urbanize that? And what kind of infrastructure do we want to provide there? And with these scenarios, you can make all different types of, let's say, evaluations. So the first one I showed you was the cartographic, but you can also say which one gets us closest to the zero net land take. And the last one, how do they score on sustainability? Because every single one scores slightly differently, and you can't say that one is much more better than the others, because there are many, many different trade-offs. And that's a political decision, a decision that many of the people here will have to make that are policymakers. So thank you very much. That was my very quick overview of the main developments in Europe now and in the future.